Alright, good evening guys. Thanks for watching the video again. A lot of you have given me good feedback on them, so I hope they work well for you. And the worst that happens is, you can ask questions in class, but this is a way for me to get some information to you. We're going to talk a little bit today in genetics unit about a guy named Gregor Mendel, and the pages will be told to you. And I'm going to get this going, and I'm going to kind of explain who this guy was, and, again, stop whenever you want to, and take some notes. So let's start. This guy, Gregor Mendel, we've kind of already been working a little bit with meiosis and a little bit of introduction to genetics. We're going to talk a little bit of how that was discovered today, and it was discovered by a guy named Gregor Mendel, and he is one of what we call the father of genetics. So what is genetics? Well, first of all, you need to understand that heredity is the term when you say I'm passing my traits on from a parent to an offspring. That's called heredity. And if you study heredity, then you're called a geneticist or genetic study. So genetic biology. So if you're studying the passing of traits, you're studying heredity, you're a geneticist. And Gregor Mendel was considered to be the father of genetics. And so let me tell you a little bit about him. He was a monk. I don't know if you know what a monk is, but he is usually someone who believes fully in spirituality and meditation, and they usually live in a place together. They tend to not be out. They tend to think, meditate, philosophize, write, learn. And he liked that environment. His main job there was he kept the gardens of the monastery up, and also did a lot of gardening for the food for the monastery as well. And he was working with some pea plants, and quite honestly just stumbled upon, he's an example of a guy who started to stumble upon some things he was noticing about the plants when they were making new plants, specifically pea plants. And so I'll show you an example of how that all worked. He started doing what we call cross-pollination, which is when you take the pollen from one flower of a plant and you put it onto the female part of another flower, and you actually make new plants, new seeds. And that's called pollination. I think you've probably heard that term, but we'll talk about it if you need to. Write that down as a term that you want to kind of make sure you understand. Cross-pollination is the taking of pollen from one plant and moving it to the other plant. Sometimes bees do it too, but he did it personally himself. And here are some of the traits that he looked at. We're going to specifically do an example with seed shape today, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about some flowering things too, but we're going to really look at the seed shape. But the rest of the things he looked at the seed's color, the seed shape, the coat of the seed. He looked at the pod shape, the pod color, if it was a plant that had seeds in pods like green beans and peas. And he looked at flowers and the height of plants. He looked at where the flowers were and how tall the plants were. These were all different traits that he used to study in this monastery. So how did it all start? Well, one day he started to notice that when he was trying to grow some new flowers for the monastery, that he cross-pollinated a purple flower with a white flower of the same kind of plant, but just a different flower and a different color, just like humans have different colors. And when he did that, the new plants that came, all of the flowers were purple, and he found that a little weird, because he said, why, if the one plant parent was a purple and the other one had white flowers, why aren't the kids both, or a mix, or something like that? Why are all the flowers, why is it like the white doesn't exist? And furthermore, when he took two of those purple flowers that were the result from here, and he crossed them, some of the baby's flowers, some of the baby plants had white flowers. So he's like it came back out of nowhere. From two purple flowers came some white flower offspring. So he thought that was very interesting, and he came up, based on that experience and further testing, probably about 3 years worth of publishing and researching before he actually had a full theory made up. But this is the end result. We have traits in our bodies, he said, and for example, flowers have different colors, and if you get a chromosome from your mom and a chromosome from your dad, diploid, that says you're supposed to be purple for both, then you're going to be purple. That makes sense. But he said that there's this thing called dominant and recessiveness. Dominant and recessive mean that if you get two purples, let's say, two purple flowers, and they both chromosomes say purple, then the kid's going to be purple. And if two flowers say they're white flowers, they'll be white. But what happens if one of the parents is purple and one's white, and you don't know which one is supposed to be the one that's going to show? What if you have a set of chromosomes, a pair of chromosomes from your mom, well, one from your mom and one from your dad, homologous chromosomes, and what happens if one says purple and one says white? Well, Mendel would say the purple will win. He said that because that's the only way you could explain why a purple and white flower, when they were mated or when they were cross-pollinated, all of the offspring turned out to be one color. He called that the dominant color. And even in the second cross, when you cross those two purple flowers, only 25% were white and 75% were purple. So he said that purple was dominant, and he called the other trait that is not really seen, or the one that's not there very much, a recessive trait. Now, we've modified that term a little bit from the way it was used then. Now, dominant recessive just mean that if you have a copy of a trait that says you're going to be brown-haired, and the other one from your other parent says you're going to have black hair, which one wins? And in the case of black and blonde hair is dominant to blonde. So if you have one and the other as both your chromosomes, you're going to have black hair. That's what dominance means now. We'll practice with that. We learned a little bit of practicing with meiosis, the making of sperm and egg gametes. And I want to remind you of a few things that Mendel came up with in his explanations of what was going on. And then later on I'll show you a slide in a couple minutes that has like the overview. But what he said was that there's this law that happens, and the law is called the law of segregation. And that says that when you make sperm and egg during meiosis, they're either going to get one chromosome from the mom, or they're going to, like if it's dad's sperm, they're either going to get one of the pair or the other one of the pair, but they only get one of the chromosomes. Remember, we called that making them haploid, having one of each of the pairs but not both copies. And that is called the law of segregation. Segregation means to separate. So if you have, again, a copy of a pair number 1 chromosome, the law of segregation says that the sperm will get either one of the chromosomes or the other, but not both. Then he came up with another one that is actually used more in a Punnett square purpose that's called the law of independent assortment. And what that says is, once dad's sperms are made and mom's eggs are made, when they come together, you don't know what's going to happen. Dad, you could get all sorts of different results from this, and we're going to show you in a Punnett square in a second how this works. But it's defined as if genes are not on the same chromosome, then they can combine independently and give you all sorts of different results for what the offspring might be like. So take a look at this picture and I'll explain it. You look there and you see a male sperm, and remember we're going to use some symbols here to represent like round and wrinkled. And this dad had two chromosomes, as you know, a pair, but when he makes his sperm are either going to get this chromosome or this one. That's called the law of segregation. Same thing with mom's eggs. They're either going to get this one or they're going to get this letter. They don't get both because we're making haploid cells here in meiosis. The law of independent assortment says that you never know what's going to happen with the kids, that you can't make a prediction. So it says that dad's one chromosome could go with mom's chromosome here, or dad's this chromosome could mix with mom's chromosome here, or this chromosome from mom and this one from dad can form, or this one from dad and this one from mom can come together right here. So we're intersecting these arrows. And this is called a Punnett square. And so independent assortment says that these can go together in any fashion. So big, little, and little. And we'll understand what that means as we practice. And they're helped to use to predict the offspring, and we'll talk about that. We're going to do lots of problems. That's pretty much the whole unit. So here's how he might have explained round and wrinkled. Let's take a look at these here. This is a round seed, and here's a wrinkled seed. And when he crossed them, he got all of the pea plants that were there all had round. Weird thing, because he said, well, that's weird because there's a parent here that's wrinkled. Why aren't any of the kids wrinkled? Well, because round is dominant to wrinkled. So you don't actually even know that little one's there. You'll never know. Take a look at the shape here. But, just like with the purple and white, when he crossed this with itself, and he has this thing here, here's where you get segregation. The sperm from the male would either get one big S and one little s. And then if you're crossing it with another round plant, that's the same letters, big and little. Look what you magically have happen. You get one out of the 4 that might have wrinkled covering, even though neither parent here did. So because it comes back from here, from the original parent generation. We call this first generation the F1 and the second generation the F2. So we're going to be practicing with these, and this is the big, big, and here's a big little. Now these two are identical to each other. They're both round and they have the same letters, but this one will look the same. It's going to be round, but it has actually two copies of the chromosome, and they both say round, round. This says round, wrinkled. This says round, wrinkled, but that dominates. Round dominates over wrinkled, so they'll all be round. This is the only one out of the four where the trait kind of magically reappears, like the purple did. A little less from mom and a little less from dad. This one here and this one here. And now you have a kid or an offspring that ends up being wrinkled. And the last thing I'll mention to you really briefly is that if something you don't want or want is a recessive trait, then we call it recessive inheritance. Many diseases are that, where you don't want to get the little one and the little one. Dominant inheritance means that the trait or the sickness is on the dominant chromosome. When we talk about hair color and things, we usually talk about dominant inheritance because the dominant one's the one that you maybe want. Hopefully diseases aren't dominant. Most diseases are recessive, but recessive traits, so that there's only really a 1/4 chance of getting the disease in a lot of cases. Dominant inheritance just means that the trait that you're looking at is a dominant trait. So the big letter is the one that you kind of either want, or I guess maybe that you don't want. And that's called recessive inheritance and dominant inheritance. And I'll be telling you more about that as we go. I hope this makes sense. And I'm going to try to see if this worked, and if I have to go back and redo anything all over again, I will. Right now, this is not working. I'm going to see how this worked. Have a good night, everybody. I hope this comes out okay.